Three, two, one. So today we have a really special guest for you. I think after the interview I filmed yesterday, an interview with Outer Overman, this is like top three interview on this channel. I cannot decide which one is the best of those three interviews. So today we are introducing to you Joseph March, Psycho Saucer, Grand Infinity, the guy who was also having a really interesting professional career before he got into occultism, the guy who managed to cure his own mental illness with occultism and have a functional family with a normal wife, guy who is successful in every area of his life and personally happy individual, Joseph March. And yeah, Joseph, having you on a channel is really an honor. And I wanted to interview you for a long time, but I honestly thought that you are somebody who doesn't like to be interviewed. And it's to me that you even accept the interview because you don't want to be a part of large YouTube occult community anymore. You want to have your own private life. So it is really an honor for me to interview you. So today, I usually ask the first question because I am full of my own shit. But since I think that you are much more older than me and experienced than me and worthy of asking questions, then I give you an honor to ask the first question.
That was a really nice intro. I hope I can live up to it.
You definitely can.
I do want to say too that I'm a fan of your channel, so the feeling is mutual. That might not be obvious, nobody knows who watches each other usually, but you have definitely inspired some of the work that I've done as well. So, kudos to you.
Yeah. So
More specifically, I think if we are going recently, you did a video on. Let me think what this was specifically. Agendas, asking an entity about its agenda and not just assuming things. And that was a very interesting experience for me when I followed that advice.
yeah. So what's your first question?
So I know that I recently did a video where I reviewed one of your videos. That's how we ended up coming up with the idea to get together and speak. So in that particular video, you were talking about shadow work and things like that. And at the end, you said you were going to talk about a method for doing this with energy. But that video hasn't come up yet. So is that coming?
It's like coming, and I will explain it here. As I will not film a separate video. Here, I will actually force motherfuckers to turn on this video to see your ass if they want to get that question answered.
I love it.
So, in proof, what I meant by that, okay? So, what is that shadow negative energy? So, if you ever get really goddamn depressed and you want to jump from the top of the building, and to a lot of people and not just to me, and it happened to you too, when you get so depressed, everything gets a grayish color to itself. The food loses taste. You are unable to be sexually aroused. You are unable to clearly think, and you are also unable to imagine any emotional state outside of that. So the negative energy I describe is the energy which possesses the grayish color everybody sees when they are in that extremely depressed state.
Yeah, I understand that.
That is that energy. Now, people usually, when they talk about shadow work, they are describing something which they imply to be external. So there is my spirit animal, there is my shadow. And the thing is, it is all actually, when you are depressed, you actually physically feel that there is something dark about this world and there is something gray about this world. And people can say, everything blackened to me, or everything is gray to me, or everything lost color to me, because they literally physically perceive the loss of color in their world. Their brain becomes so fucked up that even the color perception is fucked over.
Yeah.
And that grayness, that absence of color, that absence of ability to change your emotional state is actually depicted in the aura of somebody as gray energy. And if you train yourself to go into those states and see the world in such an autistic way, right? Then you literally see the gray energy on your aura. And then you work with it, and then you move it, and then you literally experience it. But when you experience it willingly, there is a difference in phenomena. So, first and foremost, how you do it. So, you cannot do it yourself. You need to have a spirit with you, or spiritual connection, or connection to subconscious, or connection to something which is between subconscious or reality. You get what I'm saying. So there
Yeah.
needs to be some form of, I will not say deity, because it invokes cartoonish image of guy who is invisible, but somebody becomes puppet and sees the invisible guy. I am not
Yeah.
describing that, but you need to connect to certain energy of the universe, which actually corresponds to that kind of work. And within my framework, I connected to Hindu spirits.
Right.
So there are multiple spirits I worked with on this. So I first worked with Tantric Master, one of the Tantric Masters. Then I worked with multiple demons and from the Tantric tradition. And then I worked with the specific Tantric Master described in a video. So how you do this is you draw the yantra and you chant and you call her up. And then that's when I stopped the video, right? Because I
Yeah.
want
Yeah.
that thing. So I actually wanted to motivate people to look through their own bullshit, right? Because, like, here is the thing: when she arrives as energy, when that energy arrives, the energy will explain you in the way you
Yeah.
can get it, how the shadow self is actually already there, and how you actually need to work with it as energy or as whatever, and how there is nothing subconscious in subconscious. So what's the point of the shadow thing? Is she kind of explains that there is nothing hidden in the hidden worlds. All of those worlds, essentially, all of those lower worlds or all of those negative energies, they are already connected to our world. And what we need is we need to perceive them, and then we need to learn how to work with them.
Right.
So, what it is meant by that you need to learn how to work with them is you need to learn how to use it for the purpose you want it to do. So, in my personal philosophical thought, I use it to merge with the supreme truth, right?
Right.
But somebody else would use it for money, or he will use it for success in sex, or he will use it for winning the lottery. There are all kinds of ways you can use it, but she will explain to you when she comes through methodology three things you should do, how to start acknowledging this process, and when it is said that she essentially works with the realm of shadows, I actually purposefully put explanation like that because I didn't want to put my own interpretation of it into the people's head, right? So what she means, according to my XP, right, is this. So you have this world, right? And we perceive this world as something which is differentiated, right? So you have color blue, you have color red, you have different elements, and they are like colliding and fusing together. But in between this world, like in the building block of this reality we experience, there is extremely dense energy. You can, people call it dark matter, but when spirits talk about that, in my personal fucked up opinion, they do not refer to the dark matter which is discussed in modern physics. So imagine like this. So you know the stars, right?
Mhm.
So when the star takes too much energy, it like poofs and then it's nothing. But that nothingness is actually not nothing
Mhm.
because it is something. So they are describing it like this. So in the basic structure of this reality we experience as living creatures, there is extremely condensed energy, which is so condensed that when you experience it, you immediately want to kill yourself. And that energy is actually the energy all of those powers of the universe we call spirits, especially darker ones,
Mhm.
emanate and operate under. And that quote unquote world of shadows is essentially the building block of absolutely everything. So everything is built at top of that. At top of that condensed energy, which is extremely condensed, that when we experienced it, we wanted to kill ourselves. But
Mhm.
it's actually not just the part of our psyches, it is actually the building block of the universe. But the reason why we don't acknowledge it is because it is not something which is necessarily pleasant to us. Okay.
Right.
So let's give a really important, really good metaphor for this. So the ground we stand on is literally built on our corpses,
Mhm. Yeah.
for our corpses, right?
Mhm.
And that is something which they kind of really explain that the point of all of those terrible visions they give you, especially
Mhm.
those other beings. You worked with Morgan, and I
Yep.
actually worked with Morana. Morana is simply Slavicized version of the name Morgan,
Okay.
right? It's the same spirit with two letters changed, right? And
Mhm.
what she tends to do to all of the devotees is she tends to like. I talked to multiple people independently,
Mhm.
so this is not just. So she tends to go, and she tends to go with you, and while you are in between the sleep and waking state,
Mhm.
she tends to pressure you, creates enormous amount of pressure, and then send you the most absurd, the most ridiculous, gore-like visions you can imagine. And that can sometimes come to the point that you literally don't want to go to sleep because you know that when you go to sleep, you will
Mhm.
not sleep, you will not rest, you will be tortured, and she will purposefully push that shit on you. And the
Mhm.
reason why they do this is because we as a human beings are programmed to be unaware of our own mortality.
Yeah.
So everybody thinks that when he is bored, uh, he will live forever. In his case, nature will make a weird exemption and he will live for 10,000
Right.
years.
Yeah.
So that's of every human ever. And what those spirits do is they essentially, you know, what they do is they essentially, how to say, force you to acknowledge your own mortality, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, I
And
know what you're talking about because Tiamat is very big on this same sort of thing. But for that particular relationship, you can almost say it's like explaining nature in a way that isn't. So I would call it like it's in the middle, but like what I consider the middle path. But I think what I consider the middle path is what some people would think is really dark. So I don't know. I don't want to mislead people, but like accepting the like truth of nature, for lack of a better way to say it, as opposed to like the happy puppy dog view of how nature and animals work, but also not viewing it as like just a vicious something, like it's a cycle, the cycle of life and all that other stuff. Like a lot of that type of understanding goes in, but then on a personal level and how it interacts in your day to day. So I assume that that's also mixed up in what you're talking about there with understanding your own death and mortality, but also understanding how all of that, we as humans ignore all of that unpleasantness across the board for the most part.
And I also remember that I forgot to answer your first question completely, which is what's the technique I personally use to go into that negativity in the presence of those spirits.
Mm-hmm.
So pretty simple. You close your eyes, and then you know that when you meditate, you feel electricity around yourself. That's
Yeah.
something which is like part of meditation for everyone. Well, you go until that point that you feel electricity around yourself, and then you close your eyes in the presence of that entity, right? And if you focus on that electricity long enough, that electricity will start having the different layers of the density,
Mm-hmm.
or it will be perceived by your mind as different colors. It depends on people. To some people, it's exclusively different levels of density. To other people, it can appear as different colors.
Yeah.
And so you focus on the denser parts or on the gray parts, depending on how your system interprets that electricity, which you feel when you meditate in that trance state.
Right.
So you focus on those parts of self while you receive that same gray energy from the yantra and from whatever semi-intelligent came from it. So it is like essentially, so I will give you a really experience from yesterday. So I had a guy who hired me to curse his ex, right? And I cursed his ex, and he saw his ex mentally unstable in town. It was
Yeah.
definitely clear that something was off with her, right? But he was like really heavily on something more terrible happening to her than what other people. And I decided to do something else. So I will stop charging this guy for everything, and I will simply teach him, right? And so I wanted to kind of teach him that it's good to be aggressive. But
Mm-hmm.
I think that that person kind of had wrong expectations in a sense that if you're expecting heads to fly in 7 days and glasses to move in your apartment, you will
Yeah.
always be disappointment, right? There is no man who can do what people expect in certain instances. So I wanted to like teach him, and I wanted to kind of go through those experiences with him for free, not as a sorcerer for hire, but as a teacher. And I wanted to, you know, kind of guide myself and guide him to some higher realization, kind of along the same road. And what I did yesterday, I was like, so how we did it is I drew the yantra at my side, and he drew the yantra on his side of the certain being. And then we started chanting.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened is this: I experienced extreme pressure and grayness coming from the seal, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then energy mounted me, and I started to like really have difficult difficulties thinking, right? My
Right.
mind was heavily under stress. On his side, it was a little bit different.
Mm-hmm.
He was simply chanting and feeling enormous amounts of heat, right?
Right. Yeah.
And then what happened is like, because the point of it was to consecrate the dagger, I told him like, try to feel anything from the dagger, right? And he told me, I don't feel anything from the dagger, I
Mm-hmm.
feel heat.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's okay, we will do the consecration again.
Yeah.
And so by my logic, by my thinking, that heat which appeared, so he felt extreme heat, and then after
Mhm.
the end of the ritual he was exhausted.
Right.
And as somebody who works with spirits and who worked, you know that that that's how things happen in the beginning.
Exactly.
So
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
you feel some unexplainable phenomena, pressure, heat,
Yeah,
and
I
then
always called it pressure at the
you
beginning.
exhausted afterwards, right? So look, I was thinking like this: if it was just, heat, then you can say that maybe he had a really strong radiator
Hmm.
or he had a fever, right? But you do the ritual and then he feels heat and exhaustion.
Yeah.
So those phenomena together. At the same time, during the ritual and a little bit after it. So I was like, that's sign that the ritual worked in a way. And what we need to do is we need to do it again, and he needs to learn to control the experience, and he needs to learn to distinguish energy and to practice. And then he also needs to learn to kind of get his things done through what he wants, because clearly I am not enough invested in that particular case
Yeah.
to go anything beyond mental instability for the person. And to be honest, I don't do that kinds of operations anymore that much because I am not into it.
Yeah.
I do not believe that it is the main point of doing work with darker entities. And
Yep.
after he told me that he thinks that heat is only because he is maybe sick or something, I told him that okay, so you think that heat is not enough, and you also think that exhaustion is not enough. That is okay. I believe that those are signs of the entity. If you disagree with me and if you want something else, you are free to talk to me, right? And we are free to discuss, but you are also free to go to somebody else to teach you,
Hmm.
right? Because I am not charging you and I am not obligated to necessarily do in a way you wanted to do, right?
Right.
And he was like, you kind of want to go away from me. And I am like, no, I don't want to go away from you. I simply disagree with the way you perceive those things. I
Yeah.
disagree with attitude of many people that the glasses should fly and
Hmm.
dragons should be seen and things like that. Majority of times it's heat, it's pressure, it's and the thing is, what interested to me the most is that it doesn't matter what he did, he simply felt the increase of heat. So what I am thinking, and that's what I asked you,
Hmm.
and that's what you kind of remind me of. Maybe, we interpret that energy through different lens, right?
Yeah.
So
Right.
think about what you feel. It's about what happens after, right?
Right.
So if you have some form of insight after, or if you have some form of manifestation after in a physical world, then you nailed it.
Yeah.
Though the way it kind of shows up is not necessarily, let me just close the door, is
Oh
not
yeah.
necessarily important. So essentially, that case made me thinking, but at the same time, this is your interview. So how you start?
Yeah, I turned it on you.
Yeah,
Yeah, so it's interesting because we talk about when you're first starting out. I used to call it, I used to try to describe it as a pressure or as like a thickening of the air
yeah,
because I didn't know how to describe the feeling exactly, but there was kind of like a tightening of everything and just this feeling that comes over you. And then the more I did it, I got heat, just like you're talking about. And then eventually, it wasn't like through training specifically that I was able to eventually get more than that. It was just through repetition, which I guess is training, but it wasn't. People always think I feel like you want to do mental exercises, but I just kept on evoking things. Not that that's a good good thing to suggest for people, but until eventually I started feeling more. So it just kind of happened naturally over time. And it wasn't fast. So I think people want to think like, oh, I felt something this time, so next time it's going to be big and awesome. It's like it takes a while.
Yeah. But my question is, because you have two deities which are like the main ones. Uh, Actually three. You had, because I follow you for a goddamn long time.
Hmm.
You had Ishtar in the beginning, really
Yes.
heavy Ishtar fan, and then you were guided to Tiamat, and
Hmm.
then after some time after, which alongside Tiamat, you accepted Morgan.
That's right.
So you mostly work with those three spirits. So how you got introduced to Ishtar, and what was your experience with her?
So that was like, it's funny because I think I want to say is his name Poke Runyon? I can't remember. He used to talk about Astarte, and
Ryman. Yeah.
yeah, and I was watching a lot of his videos, and I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. And I started looking into Astarte, but at that time I was more into goetic workings and things like that. And this is pre my channel. And I found some indicators that Astarte may also be Astaroth. And so I decided to evoke Astaroth, and that is how that entire relationship started. Um, and from Astaroth's explanation, so take it for what it's worth, because again, this is me in the earlier years. Astaroth is Astarte and is Ishtar, but when and I was encouraged to make a channel by Astaroth, but the explanation was, well, call me Ishtar on the channel because it's the more friendly, like relatable name to give to people who aren't familiar with these workings. So that was how the meeting sort of happened.
Yeah. So can you describe what was your experience? Because here is a thing. The first and last evocation of your magical existence you can always describe. The hundreds of repetitions in between, like if somebody asks me, what was your 13th evocation? Or what was your
Oh
20th?
yeah.
Or what was your 100th? I wouldn't know to say, but how that first looked like.
So well, so the first few times I tried to do evocation, I don't even know if I did it. So, like obviously you have that period where you do the thing, you feel a little something, you ask for what you're going to ask for. And I was big back at the beginning in like asking for things. I wasn't on the self-awareness kick that I got on later. Uh, and I would ask for the things, and then later they would happen or not. But then the first time I had one where it really felt like powerful, and that's the one where it'll be the first one you can really remember. I was calling for Baal, and I had incense, and I don't know if I told this story on the web or not, so it's maybe a repeat. But I had incense and the like, and I was, I had my stuff all set up on the floor. I mean, it was on top of, protective plates and everything. But there was also a glass bowl there. And as I was starting to actually feel the pressure and everything, it got a little more intense, and the glass actually broke. It wasn't like something out of a movie. It's not like it shattered across the room, but like it cracked. And then that was enough to just focus my attention in. And suddenly I started getting like full on communication messages and that sort of thing. And that's the first time I've ever experienced that. Um,
So,
I mean, I've never had something quite like that happen again, except there was another time that I believe it was also with Bale where I had a burner where flame shot up and stayed in a column once, which I also don't understand. But this is like a year or so apart from each other, so I don't have like these kind of phenomenal things happening every time I've ever done this. But that one I specifically remember, but it kind of snapped my attention out of asking for things and into listening, I feel like, when it happened. And from that point forward, I sort of learned to listen when you get those feelings. And that was what I needed to start getting actual communication.
yes. So for people who constantly, because I constantly had the same question, and not only me, but many others, but I am like a really maybe I am maybe a little bit prideful when this
Hmm.
question is asked. I need to admit, when somebody asks me what I should feel,
Hmm.
simply reply, what do you expect? Because if you expect glasses flying across the room and demons physically manifesting through some portals in the netherworld, it will not happen. But slight pressures and heat and the interesting thing which happens to me a lot, so I was always capable of feeling energies, but not intensely in the beginning. It was more like when I just started, I would like felt not even the energy. It was more like a particular form of fire in the space. So Lucifer was always like dark blue fire, Paimon red fire, like an astral fire, like an astral energy of particular quality. But I wasn't able to hear anything, and I wasn't able to see anything more.
Right.
So it was like me talking to some fires I see.
Yep.
And nothing would reply back. And I had actually a pretty big period of delusion where I actually had two really dangerous delusions in the beginning. One was that I was attacked by ancient entity, and another was that I communicate with spirits all the time. Because I would like ask questions to entity so and so, and then something would reply back. And I initially anticipate, but I would like sit, watch TV, and then I ask the question and something would reply. And I would anticipate that it was the entity, right? But later I was like playing the video game on a phone. I was 16 years old. And I asked a spirit, presumably, who visited my home in the lower floor, because we have two floors, upper and lower, and somebody went into the lower floor. And I thought I was communicating with Lucifer, and he said one answer. And then I go down, I see another motherfucker. And then I figured out that really I was simply talking to my own mind.
Right.
So I started evoking more, but it always appeared as some pressure, right? Some pressure and some colored fire. So nothing specific. And it was like that for a really long time. It was like that for first 2.5 years. Through multiple books and practices. I also had one other particular problem. And that problem was I had like a dark being attached to my left shoulder, would whisper the things only in one of my ears, and it would always whisper the same type of absurdities. So it would go on a loop and repeat the things over and over. And so I would use the exorcisms, certain vanishings, to feel a relief, right? But it would always return, and I would call spirits and make pacts and covenants for that protection, and they would do their things, but it would always return. And then finally, when I started working with Hindu spirits, the thing is, wasn't there for a long time, because what would I do when that happens is I would like simply do a really heavy banishing, and then I would still feel something in the background, but I would like ignore it and then it would stop. But after I started working with Hindus, with Chayayan, with other entities of Darker Hindu pantheon, and actually explain how it works to me completely. So essentially, how they describe this to me is like this. So you are having a negative energy in your aura, right? And that negative energy creates pressure. That pressure, when builds up, malfunctions your brain. And your brain is so pressured that it starts observing its own thoughts with more intensity. So, because you are under a lot of stress, right? Your thought is not of a normal intensity, it's much stronger. And so the voice of your thoughts is stronger. So if you under extreme stress have some internal conflict, and that manifests as thoughts, and that negative energy presses you really hard, then you can pretty easy go on a loop of thoughts which you hear all the time.
Hmm.
And that never ending loop in which those thoughts stress you, it creates pressure, it empowers the negative energy, and then the negative energy pressures more, and it really grinds down the psyche,
Yeah.
right? So what you need to do, my dear friend, is
Mhm.
not to recite XY quadrillion exorcisms to people and to yourself. What you need to do is you need to do the exorcism until you are relieved. So the voice is really silent. And then you need to go into meditative state and then meditate until you calm down and then hold the calmness.
Yeah.
And then the voice will cease completely because what attaches to you is not the problem. The problem is that you are feeding them, you are
Hmm.
giving them food. They would never remain near the empty fridge. If you take all of the food from their fridge and if you constantly burn it down, they would go to another fridge after a while.
Right.
And that's another delusion I had, that I was attacked by ancient being. That was the first delusion. And delusion number two was that I communicate with spirits all the time.
Hmm.
And that delusion sometimes repeats because after the ritual, you have some of the energy in the entity in you. So if you, for example, think and you ask a question in your mind, something will answer back. And because you think and you feel the energy of the entity, you will think that it's the entity, but
Yeah.
in reality, it's not. So the only way for us to really be sure that it's the spirit is if you do the full ritual and you disregard all of the thoughts outside of the ritual as
Right.
exclusively your own. Because, when you go into I am under the influence of the spirits, let me ask them without the ritual, like I fell into so many delusions over the years. And the
Hmm.
thing with those delusions is that they always produce a lot of havoc before you discover they are
Yeah.
delusions.
Yes.
So, you actually deleted your own channel
My old
because
one. Yeah.
you discovered you are in a delusion. So,
Right.
how it actually happened?
Well, so you've heard the story on the old channel about how there was a point where I figured out, and it was with the Morgan's help, that a lot of entities I thought I was working with were fragments of myself. They were all kind of born out of past trauma as a child. And so they were appearing to me as if they were external when they weren't. And but it was weird because, as you and I've talked about before, there was some weird poltergeisty type experiences that happened in and around that, and some work with Tiamat, which is why I thought they were external. So I don't exactly know how to explain how those two things happened at once, or maybe it's more doing maybe because I didn't see like objects move, for example, but I would leave a room and come back and things were in a different order. But I don't know if we're dealing with like a psychosis of some sort. For all I know, I could be blacking out, sort of being taken over by this other part of myself, move the objects, and then coming to or something. I've never quite figured out what caused the poltergeist stuff. All I know is that when I found out they were parts of myself, the way that it kind of got proven was in shadow work and accepting past traumas. And with each past trauma that I accepted, one of them would go away. And so it just corresponded. It was like pulling those separated parts of yourself back in. So at the time, I thought of it as if they were external and I was taking these fragments of myself back into myself. But in retrospect now, with what I know more about, it has to do with blockages within the mind and uh, delusional thinking to avoid those traumas. So I definitely had to deal with all of that. But my experience is similar to what you said, where I worked with the Morgan I don't have advice for some people. Always ask me like, "Oh, tell me how to do shadow work," because I have some past traumas too. It's like I didn't come up with a methodology. I followed what the Morrigan directed, and that's not helpful for most people.
Yeah,
Just-
because
especially if you can't tell what's a delusion or not. So then how do you know you're listening to the right
yeah,
thing?
yeah. But one important advice when you are doing regression of some sort, right,
Mhm.
is to not accept everything you feel and
Right.
everything you see at face value. So maybe the things you see are symbolical representations of the
Yeah.
events, right?
Yes. Correct.
For
Absolutely.
example, this is something I dare not to admit, but I will admit it here on the video. I usually, during those past life, not past life, but past memory
Hmm.
regression, saw a vision of my father raping me, right? But
Hmm.
if I actually turn clock back, I was never raped by my father. It's a symbolical representation of the fact that my father inflicted trauma. So my
Right.
mind, when I saw a vision, interpreted that as a rape, but
Hmm.
there was rape. I actually had unpleasant experiences of sexual nature, but they are not this specific person and this specific. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, definitely.
Really, there is another problem because when you do shadow work, dealing with that negativity, you also fall into a lot of delusions.
Hmm. Yep.
Because essentially, what happens is your trauma remanifests itself so that you can
Yes.
deal with it again in a really physical way.
Yes.
And then you need to, you know, deal with it. But it really manifests a physical event. That's what people don't understand.
Hmm.
It manifests a physical event, and you need to deal with the physical event. And a lot of people, like when they start working with it, they develop all kinds of delusions,
Hmm.
and those delusions are like pretty dangerous.
Hmm.
So here is the thing. So you actually deleted your channel.
Hmm. Yeah, the old one.
Yeah, the old one. And I was at the edge of deleting this one
Hmm.
because once you actually start working with uh, those things, right? With those negative energies, and when you start to absorb them and work with them and absorb them from the universe, you realize that majority of your occult beliefs are delusion,
Yes.
right? They are not real. So what you told in that old video is heavily misinterpreted.
Hmm.
You told that you don't believe there is Morgan or that there is Tiamat, but that's not
Right.
what you meant, right?
Right. Exactly. It's
What you meant is that there is energy of the thing which
yes.
then we interpret as Morgan, and there is energy of the thing which we interpret as Tiamat, but there is no dragon flying,
Right.
and there is no
Yes.
woman with the sight, and there is
Yeah.
no them walking and fighting and talking in some invisible world,
Yeah.
which
There's
some majority of people see the gods. They claim they
yes.
don't, but in reality they do. So what you said is like this. This is connected to my own mind. There
Hmm.
are some energies, but I do not believe there is Morgan anymore. I do not believe in gods anymore. I
Right.
am now reconsidering again that this is all psychological. But what you meant by reconsidering is you meant like I am aware that this mind of mine is really intimately connected to this, and so I shouldn't see
Yeah.
it as something completely independent from the mind. And then I got really goddamn angry, and a lot of people got goddamn angry.
Oh yeah.
Then you had a series of videos on some other channel you also had, which you talked about how entire occult community is delusional, and how it's
Which
all
is true.
most of the
I meant it
time.
in the nicest way.
Yeah, yeah. But here is the thing: when I reflect on my own old delusions, you are 100% wrong. So the reason my channel was called Son of Lilith is because there is a period of my development where I literally thought that I was like son of Lilith, and that Lilith is my mother, and that there is nothing bad about my mother. And that's like delusional thinking. It's a classical example of people who are hospitalized, for thinking bullshit. But I want to ask a really controversial question now. So you are the only guy ever who filmed the actual possession on camera, right? So the actual possession, when people go blank and you see a natural movement, unnatural screams. So many people ridiculed it in the comments, because I read the comments.
Oh yeah.
When the video, so many people ridiculed it in the comments, but they ridiculed it because many of the things you did in the video were not understandable. So nobody like understood why the fuck is this guy moving neck like crazy, and why is he muggling uncontrollable sounds. But
yeah,
it's in reality the actual possession. So what you did for that infamous clip, how
yeah, I know that got me a lot of attention. Yeah, and that's, I think, the only one of those types of evocations that I ever filmed, because I wouldn't necessarily say it was just bad attention, but like I was like, I don't want to be the guy that's known for filming this type of stuff over and over again. I was like, you've got your example. Like, there it is. And that was a Tiamat invocation. So if anyone out there does work with, so there was a lot that you just said. So let me back up a second. A lot of times when I talk about things from the past, I will talk about it from like gods and deities perspective, because that's what I believed then, but I don't want people to think like it was 100% wrong, because that's not what I mean. Just like you said, I see it in a different way now. So I still work with what I would consider Tiamat, but I don't think of it the way I thought of it then. As you had put it, it's not spirits walking around like going to bars in their spirit world, like it's a whole different thing. It's a formless reality that you're tapping into. And so if Tiamat looks a certain way for me and looks different for other people, that's our interpretation of the energy being given a form to represent it, so to speak. And then I would, if I go too far down this rabbit hole, I would even argue that all of the gods are more or less one thing reflected through different lenses. So you're really just working with one main thing, but maybe focusing on, to use energy language, maybe to better explain it, like you're taking a certain stream of the energy from the source or whatever and working with it, and that's why it's different from the others, but it's still coming from the same source, if that makes sense. Yeah. So I would argue at this point that the Morrigan, Ishtar, and Tiamat are all the same being I was working with, but through different forms, through different channels. But then when I say that, people will say, oh, okay, so you just worked with one thing. And it's like, well, but when you work with them in those forms, it is different. Then they are different from one to another also. There's a difference, and yet they're the same. So it's kind of hard to explain that way. So when I still say, like, I still work with Tiamat, I see it as a different kind of energy now, but it's still the same energy or like feeling or relation to the all that I was working through back then. I just better understand it now as more like a pathway to that energy, as opposed to a being coming at me, so to speak.
Yeah.
I don't know if I completely dodged your question, because I can't remember now what I was talking about.
So I simply asked the question. So you provided a lot of context and a lot of answers to a lot of things. But I asked the question what you did for that specific ritual. Because
yeah. So I did this thing beforehand, like off camera, where I reached out, sort of, if anyone's ever kind of done a ritual to just kind of reach out for answers or whatever from the universe, sort of sort of like when you just do a meditation, but doing it as a full-blown ritual, and was asking, of all of the gods or beings or demons that I've worked with, who would be willing to possess me on camera? And only one responded, and it was Tiamat, because of course it was. And so I just nonchalantly was like, cool, sweet, that'll be great. And then I basically just let Tiamat have the show. I did the ritual. It took a little while. I don't remember if I think I cut a lot of the beginning off before I post it, because there's a lot of just sitting there and trying to get into the state and all that other stuff. But once Tiamat kind of took the reins, I just didn't have any real control over what happened. And then that's that. And that's the video. So I feel like that's an example too of where afterward, which you also don't see because the video cuts off, at the end, I was completely exhausted and I actually felt aches in my bones afterward. So I'm not excited about the idea of doing that level of possession. I've done it a couple of other times, but like it doesn't leave me feeling great. So
Look, man.
it's definitely not a trick I'd want to do like for fun.
But look, to me, like, so essentially, what motivates people to do magic is really some form of adversity. So you had your psychotic breakdown, which motivated you to do magic. I had my psychotic breakdown, but my breakdown wasn't big as yours. So the breakdown wasn't the main motivator. The motivator was my physical state, and still kind of is, because I cannot do things in a physical way, so I have to do them other way. Because I have to, survive, but also experience certain states and certain things. So to me, a possession is like a gateway to experience the world outside of limitations I currently have. But for whatever reason, I can invoke the spirit, and he can come into the body, but that's not possession. The possession is what you experience.
There's some terms, and I don't know if they're right because everybody wants to use them differently, but there's evocation, invocation, and possession. And so if I say like I invoked a spirit, I let it into my speak room. But if I say possession, I'm meaning like I just let go. Like I let it, like I don't know, some people or whatever. I'm not sure the term. Basically, it's like that usually would feel on the inside, but it definitely doesn't make my body feel good afterward.
Yeah, but like I am interested because I never experienced possession. I was always only invoking and evoking. My evocations never physical. I saw spirits physically twice, but it was like I call energy slightly, and then they, on their own will and volition, manifest from that slight thing to physical thing, and that's something I didn't push.
Yeah.
So essentially, what I kind of wanted to ask is like what you experience after possession. Do your psychic abilities increase? Do you get some particular insight after? Like, what's the aftermath?
So the insights kind of come during, and then with that one particularly, I had the video to rewatch, which was cool to be able to see what I actually said. But usually, there's extreme exhaustion, but then it's followed by sort of reflection on what was seen. Because for me, I don't want to say hallucinating. That's maybe correct though. But a lot of times, if I'm in that state, I'm not necessarily seeing the world around me anymore. And that's not apparent when you're watching me on video because you just see me. But for me, it's like I'm almost tripping, like I'm experiencing something that is not here. And during it's interesting, but like I said, after it's rough. But a lot of times, for the few times that I've done it, it's more like symbols and things. So it's hard for me to decipher what it even is. Like one thing that I've seen before, and it'll come back to me in dreams now and things, is the spiral that just is
What?
constantly growing and it like becoming more of itself. And I don't understand what that's supposed to be at all, but
So I'm sorry to interrupt you.
no, go
right?
ahead.
But when I, worked with those Hindu gods, so
Mhm.
this started when I started working with the Hindus. For whatever reason, I am not a Hindu motherfucker in a sense that I am not born in India. I am not educated in Sanskrit, nor I am educated in Dravidian languages. I am not even so familiar with Dravidian history.
Mhm.
But for some reason, the Hindu gods triggered certain processes which some other spirits didn't. But other spirits also trigger different processes. But
Right.
you talk about spirals, right?
Mhm.
Can I describe something and then you will tell me how much those experiences overlap? So
Okay.
you
Yeah.
spiral, right? You see a spiral, and spiral is usually made of light. And in the
Yes.
beginning, around the spiral, there is darkness. But after
Yes.
some time, around that same spiral, all kinds of colors start to be attracted to. And so you are in a weird, tripping, autistic world where there
Yes.
are only lights, spirals, and infinite number of colors.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay, the same thing.
Yeah. That's what I'm talking about.
It is the same place, right? So
Yeah.
to be honest and to be pretty clear, I was never 4 hours in that trippy place.
No.
But I was able to maybe meditate with Shiva and with Kali and go into it for 2 or 3 seconds.
Mhm.
But for you, I am definitely aware when you and I are talking, right?
Mhm.
It seems that we have the same intensity of experience,
Yeah.
but you actually have the much stronger intensity of experience because I am only able to see the colors,
Mhm.
while you are, according to what I kind of got from you, able to touch them
Mhm.
and you are able to experience them. So you are
On-
able to merge with the
Only,
spirit.
I would say only during the possession though. So like
Yeah.
in that particular one, um, I believe Tiamat was saying that she was going to show me something. Again, it was never specified. And then I could reach out to that, and then there were spirals within the spirals, and there were like almost like stars within stars, and all kinds of crazy ass shit, which I still don't understand.
But here is the thing. So
But again, like I've seen the spiral. Not to interrupt, but I've seen the spiral other times in deep meditation. But when I don't have that full on experience like I did during the possession.
yeah. So what you are kind of saying is, and what I'm kind of understanding now is that like I cannot force this experience. Like you
Mm-mm.
can force the. And here is the thing. So when you are trying to see the spiral, and you are not ready for it, what will happen is you will simply
You'll
see
imagine it.
the spiral, but you will not see the spiral itself. And the
Yeah.
spiral is the actual thing. So if you see only the colors and not the spiral, then it means that you are forcing the experience. And you can see the
Yeah.
spiral only when like energies allow you to see it. Like
Yes.
my first experience of the spiral was actually not the one I was aware what it is. So I was riding a horse, and my father was walking below the horse, and I
Hmm.
worked with Belial the previous day, right? But his energy was still present,
Yeah.
and then he kept repeating, "Grab your fear and throw it to the ground. Grab your fear and throw it to the ground." And as he
Hmm.
repeated, "Grab your fear and throw it to the ground," I got panic attack,
Ah,
and
yeah.
panic attack intensified so much that I saw the spiral for the first time. Actually, it
Yeah.
wasn't a spiral. It was like a ball of light, and
Hmm.
around the ball of light you had infinite colors. But it was the
Hmm.
same light you see in the spiral. And that's the
Yeah.
first time I saw this light and the colors and the spiral. the second time when I saw the spiral was I meditated with Shiva with that energy, and that time I asked him one thing: show me the true nature of reality. And he was like, you are kind of giving me extremely arrogant requests, but because you invested the effort, I will not show you the true nature. I will simply give you the glimpse of it.
Yeah.
What happened is like this. So I feel the pressure at the top of my head. Then the entire room starts to spin for a few seconds. And then
Yeah.
for 1 millisecond, this goes like this. I see pure darkness. So darkness is forced upon me. And then I see the spiral. But here it's a thing. All of this took maybe 2.5 seconds to happen. So the spinning, the darkness, and the spiral. And when it happens, you're kind of not clear. Are you imagining it? Or is it?
You don't know.
But there is definite feeling of disorientation after those 3 seconds. Like if somebody asked you which direction is sun or where is the east, you wouldn't know to answer.
No.
There is no way. So
I've described it before as having simultaneously a feeling of love and dread, because I don't know how else to explain it other than that.
Yeah.
But that's kind of the emotional equivalent of what you feel when you see it. It's definitely not a like on the one hand there's like a loving feeling, but on the other hand the dread is like really palpable.
Yeah. And like the thing is, like, because you are heavy in meditation and stuff, so you are a heavy meditator, much better than I am.
Well, I don't keep up with it as much as I used to, so don't let me fool you too much.
You are heavy meditator, so what techniques you use for meditation? Is it like just meditating or what exactly?
It's changed so many times. So, on my old channel, I used to like talk about different techniques. I would try things over, like try a new thing, and then keep perfecting. Now I do a very simple type of meditation. A lot of times, it's similar to chakra meditation. I don't want to get into it with people over whether chakras are real or not or any of that other stuff. It works for me, so whatever. But I do visualize, even though I talk about how like I don't usually use energy as my terminology, I do visualize energy for the chakra work, because that's the only way that I can kind of conceptualize it. So for me, it's like the concept of drawing energy up from the earth and then into the bottommost of the chakras, and then slowly going up the spine with the spiraling. I think they're called the Ida and Pingala, and then you get to the top of it. Now I have it when I get to what they call the third eye. I don't necessarily just spin to the top. I also think there's something back here in the back of the head where the spine meets the back of the head. So I kind of see like a double energy happen there, like up here and then back here too.
So I don't know, are you familiar with those videos I made?
I think you may have talked about this before as well, but I can definitely confirm that there's something to that.
Oh, JD Temple was my guide back in the day. You know the motherfucker.
Yep.
And taught me that there are 4 energy centers where at the place where the skull and the neck meet. They are known as the mouth of God. And I work with them a lot in the past, but now not so much. Because when you work with them, it's essentially a weird feeling that somebody's like stimulating your nerves at the back of the head.
Yes.
And it's reminiscent of orgasm at the back of the head. You also feel the pressure.
Yeah.
It's like as if somebody is fucking me at the back of the head. But it's actually the same for me. I feel it too. Yeah. But what I was also instructed by Kali to do is, so there are like 7 chakras from the roots to the crown. Okay, 7 ways we interpret energy. Okay, those chakras are not necessarily balls on your system. They are more the ways we interpret energy.
Yeah.
And then on each leg you can like 7 chakras. and those are responsible for your connection to the earth. Now I do a different thing. I push the energy from the root through the legs into the ground, and then you
Yeah.
trip, and then you trip a hell hole, right? Then you trip a hell hole, and every time you trip a hell hole, the point of it is, here is the thing. So the point of tripping a hell hole is essentially to show you what you are capable of doing, and it also give you physical energy. But it is also really dangerous because it can like leave you insane or something.
Yeah.
That hell trips. But I do hell trips because they are good for my body. It gives you animalistic energy, which is really good for workout and which is really good for your immune system. But when you trip a hellhole too much, you can become psychopathic because it becomes like a nature to you to trip a hellhole. And like I sometimes like, so that's the reason I stopped cursing, because when you trip a hellhole a lot and you curse, it stops it. So every time it manifests like some form of distraction. There is a misconception about the curses. The curses are not here to kill, right?
Right.
The curses are here to throw negative energy at people. You throw negative energy at people, and then that negative energy exacerbates their already existing weaknesses.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens then is they start producing more negative energy, and then some form of psychotic experience happens to them where they're attached to it, right?
Yep.
But you only use the darkness which is already within them. That's how curses operate. And so it's usually not aimed at killing people, it's more aimed at triggering their own negativity, triggering their own darkness by it. And like when I am doing it all the time, it kind of loses the meaning. It becomes like waking up and taking a shower. You really become a really destructive individual in that emotional and, I will not say subconscious sense, because there is a external element to this, because you are dealing with the energy of the universe, but you are becoming a really, how can I say, non-productive individual. So what I did is I performed the ritual in which I lifted majority of my operations. So I absorbed as much of that energy I could, and I simply returned it to their place of origin, that negative energy I inflicted. And then I started working with those energies to elevate myself to see the higher truth. However, I still know how to do what I need to do if I need to do. So I am one of the guys who will like say never do it because it is a bad thing. Sometimes you have to, right?
Yeah.
But can I like ask you, like, can you like, because you kind of, you definitely have some techniques on your of your own, right? Some things in your practice which are your own thing. So what I try to popularize is those lower centers. So I will tell you how I work with them, because audience will not repeat it. I know that they will not. I'm telling you this actually works. So you can tell me something you do privately, which also works, because only then it's like equal exchange. So you have 7 centers. One pair of centers, because you have 1 center on each leg, is on hips. Another pair is the upper part of your leg above your knee. So it's like, I don't know how to say it in English, but you know. The third part is on your knees. The fourth part is at your, how to say, it's like a backside of the leg where we have a big muscle. I don't know how it's said in English. Then you have the fifth, it's on ankles. The sixth is the lower part of the feet, right? And the seventh is below the feet in the ground. So, and the seventh center is 1, right? So there is 1 seventh center, and then you have,
and the others are 2.
And the others are 2, 1 on each leg. So the first one corresponds to lust, right? And that's why, as a man, if you fuck, right, if you fuck a lot, you fuck up the spine, you fuck up the hips. So why? Because the center for it is there. And the chant for stimulating that is atavam. Then the second one is corresponding to rage, but let me kind of make it clear that it doesn't correspond to necessarily emotions, right? It corresponds to the energy behind the emotions. So maybe you will not feel the exact emotion when you stimulate the exact center, but it will still be the same energy behind. So the second pair is Vityam. The third pair is Sutam, right? The fourth pair is Talariam, right? The fifth pair is Mahatam. The sixth pair is Rasatam. And the seventh pair is Patalajam, right? And so you just sit in meditation. You focus on not necessarily the feet. You don't focus on the feet. You focus on that point, which is like you get at that last point, right? And then you repeat those chants. And what will happen is enormous amount of energy will come from the ground, but also if you keep chanting, it will be from the root into the ground. So you will kind of create a closed circuit with the ground and into the ground without going up, right? And then if you do it, you will trip a hellhole, right? So you will literally trip a hellhole and you will start feeling animalistic euphoria. So if you ever took heavy drugs or alcohol, that's the feeling.
Okay.
So,
yeah.
So that's how I do it, you know. And I will also do one also really dumb thing, and I will put like in description of this video those chants. But I know people will not use them, right? And even if they use them, they will probably not use them accurately. So it will have some effect, but they will not start psychopathically killing people. Because you know, when you give information, so I gave this to you, you know, and I also kind of want you to kind of give me some of your thing, if you want, of course. If you don't, then.
So this will probably sound kind of more hippy dippy than what people want. But so I do something that I call a true actualization meditation. And so we talked about like visualizing the chakras and the energy as you go up, with it being the 7 traditional ones and then the extra one. But I tie this one and this one together in my view of it. So I see them as like the 7th step is both.
Yeah.
But I have like my little affirmations that I say as I go up. And for me, if I do these affirmations as I visualize the energy going up and to that point, then by the time I reach the last one, I'm already into that meditative state. And it can take like less than a minute to be there. So I don't know if these affirmations will work for other people because they are my own learned experience from working with these centers. But they will sound, like I said, hippy dippy compared to how I traditionally talk. So the first one, and this would relate to the lowest chakra, is adapt and avoid causing harm to others in the process. Which, of course, emphasis there on avoid. It doesn't say don't. I feel the need to make that distinction as someone who works with the energy of Tiamat, that sometimes you have to. But the point is, if you don't, then why are you doing it? The second one is be aware of your desires and find healthy outlets for them. The next one is recognize that order is established through responsibility, not through power. The one after that is embrace your emotions and accept them for what they are. Allow yourself to love, which I have to remind myself reasons. The next one is speak only truth, most especially to the self. Avoid self-delusion and deception, which is a big one. Then when you reach here, you have understand the wholeness of who you are. And then as you reach the final two, it's embrace the wholeness of the all. And that is the meditation path. Now, for me, I have switched from long-term meditation, long form meditation to short meditation. So now I'll meditate 5 to 15 minutes, and that's it. I used to be one of those people who thought it was cool to like be able to say like how many hours you were able to meditate or this or that. That to me now, I feel like you're missing out on life when you do that. It may be important at the beginning to like learn some things, but I found that everything I need from meditation I can get in 5 to 15 minutes. And that is my kind of what I just went over as my intro. Like you whip through those as you visualize the energy, and by the time I feel it back here, connected to the universe already. So
Yeah. So like
that's my new method.
Something I need to meditate a lot, not because I want to be edgy, but because I really randomly go into that state of connection with the universe, and
you need to ground it
to learn to trigger it at will. And so because I don't know how to trigger it, because the feeling of connection with the universe is not the same as the type of trance you are in when you call spirits. Those are two different types of trance.
Right.
I think that if you learn a trance of connection with the universe, you will detect the spirits much easier. But that's a different form of trance. So, like, I don't. So you have so many things. I found the question, motherfucker. So what about journeying and astral travel? Yeah.
What was that?
What about journeying and astral travel?
Oh yeah. So I like to call it journeying because as you know, as being someone in the occult community, people argue over what astral travel is all the time, and people tend to leave you alone if you call it journeying. So, so I use the term journeying because I feel like for me, what I'm doing is delving into my own subconscious. I don't see it as necessarily traveling out into the universe. Like I can't do the thing that some people say they can do, where they come out of their body and can see the actual physical room. I've never had that type of experience. For me, I go somewhere and see things that are wildly different from here whenever I do these practices. And I don't really have control over where I go either. So it's just like whatever, wherever I need to be and need to see. So it's almost more like visions for me. But I will call it a journey because I do sit down with the intention to do it and then come back with information. So that's what I do. So it's a little less exciting than what people describe as astral travel. But I couldn't tell you if it's the same thing or not.
So essentially, we are doing the same thing. So as the thing with this is you close your eyes with an intention to possibly go somewhere or to possibly say something you want to see, but then after you see it, the visions take a wild turn.
Yeah, they take you.
Cannot explain. So let's you want to see visions of particular spirit or particular deity, and let's say you raise the sacred sprays, present the deity's energy, and then go into journeying. Well, what will happen is you will see the deity, and then all of a sudden weird shit will start happening. And actually, that weird shit which is happening is what actually matters. You know?
Yeah, absolutely.
The first part is controlled by you, and second part, which is weird, is actually the message. So I remember how, when I got those visions, the first part was semi-accurate, the second part always,
Yeah.
Always accurate, maybe not in a way you wanted it to be, but it's always accurate. And like the thing with those visions, why people don't do this actually is because they are extremely, extremely unpleasant. Like when you do it even and you see something pleasant, there is feeling of otherworldliness which cannot be described. So for the audience, because I think me and Joe are talking about the same thing, what you need to do to raise the sacred space, and you simply go into meditation, right? And you don't clean out your thoughts. You just let them like wander, and
Yes.
over the time, that wandering will stop be wandering, and it will form into a coherent picture.
Yeah.
And then within that coherent picture, you will become conscious. And when you become conscious, you will investigate the picture.
Mm-hmm.
Then
Yep, that's
after
right.
some time, the picture will forcefully end, which is the
Yeah, and you
weird.
can't get back to it either.
Yeah.
That's the most annoying thing is if you feel like, oh, I want to go back and see something that I missed. It's like, nope.
Like you
You
can
don't
close,
have that kind of control.
you'll never have the same feel.
Right.
And like
You can
I
you can delude yourself by thinking that you go back if you're trying to like remember and imagine it. But that is just a delusion if you're doing it, and it won't feel the same. It's noticeable if you know how to look for it.
yeah, but like even if you return at the same place, what will happen will be completely different.
Yeah, well, sometimes I do end up in an environment that looks the same as previous times, but again, it's like, well, the setting looks the same, but then what happens next is completely different anyway. So,
Yeah, yeah. So like did you ever did some form of kundalini or something, and what do you think about it?
so I don't know if I successfully did it because I didn't have the experience as other people have said, but I still do use, like I said, the chakra concentration in the spine and whatnot. And on occasion, um, especially back when I was doing it daily and working specifically on individual chakras, I did have that weird tingliness you get in your head and that weird feeling all up and down the spine that people talk about and the heat. And I got that back pressure that feels like your muscles hurt on the top of your back. But I never got like the tripping out like craziness that people talk about. Although my experiences with the spiral are good enough that I don't feel the need to try to investigate that further. But I didn't get that from the Kundalini. That was a separate experience. So I've never quite gotten it to the point where I'm like, because people describe kind of like tripping out when they have it the whole way. I've never quite had that experience.
Like I need to admit shamefully, I felt heat a bunch of times during those chakra sessions. Build up. So you spin chakras up and you focus on them and you push the energy from the back of your spine into them, right? That's what they teach should be done. But
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. This is like a really maybe disgusting thing to say for some people. But like when I don't express my sexuality for a long time, I feel that heat on the back of my back constantly, and I have those trips constantly without like any Kundalini yoga or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. So I kind of so I do pranayama from time to time. I think this is legit. Like pranayama is
Mm-hmm.
really fucking crazy thing if you can do it. But to be honest, I think we as a Western guys, so I am not a Western guy, I am Slavic guy, that
Mm-hmm.
I am equally oblivious to Kundalini yoga actual thing as you are. Because a
Yeah.
lot of people claim to practice Kundalini yoga, and then you read the Hindu shit, and then you are like, is it even the same thing, really?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, because the Hindus are like, you will see the gods and shit. And I am
Right.
like, what those people are saying is like the spirals you and I see,
Yeah, I
just
think
in a
so.
little bit more unpleasant form.
Mm-hmm.
So they are like having the chaotic version of the spiral, while we have more refined version of the spiral. But they don't have like complete feeling of merging with the universe and shit like that as but then again, I, as crazy individual, I try to push my kundalini down instead of pushing it up
Mm-hmm.
occasionally. And the only thing I managed to do is when you push kundalini up, this first hip thing, and then you go into above the knee thing. What it does is it makes you psychopathically aroused in a certain way. I am not going to be, you know what I and I stopped doing it because I started becoming dangerous for environment. Like
Mm-hmm.
I can control myself, but having those kinds of urges, cause it really comes in extremely perverse manner. It's not something you want to do around other people. You can do it
Right.
like somewhere at some dumpster without anybody watching. But can I also ask you about your work with Morrigan?
Hmm. Yeah, sure. Anything specific or just?
So, like, can you just talk about Morrigan first, and then we'll figure out some questions.
So it's been a long time since I've worked specifically with Morgan. But like I said, my views on it now are more like it's still coming from that same source. So in a sense, I work with Tiamat again, like I did before, but it feels like all the work I did with Ishtar, Morgan, and Tiamat are kind of combined into this now. Like now that the illusion of separation is in some ways ripped off, the entity I'm working with is pulling from all of those experiences in a sense. So in a way, you could say I still work with that same thing, but if we're talking specifically about when what I worked with was the Morgan, it would be back on the old channel whenever I was dealing with my shadow work.
And so, what you felt when you called Morgan? What kind of sensation?
So one thing, and this was not necessarily at the beginning, but toward the end of the work, I got this overwhelming feeling of love, but it's hard to explain because it's not like the love a person has for another person. It's sort of like if you imagine being inside of a prison cell and then finally being released to the world again and feeling freedom, like feeling the rain on your face, like the joy of that sort of feeling is sort of like the love. But it, for some reason, it got to a point, and this is, of course, as we worked through shadow work stuff, where when she was around, I would feel that feeling. Like that would just kind of burst, and it felt like it was coming right from the center of my very self.
Yeah, yeah. There are moments when you feel. Uh, so majority of times, you can correct me if your experience is different.
Mm-hmm.
Morgan/Morana, because I am firmly convinced
Mm-hmm.
during the many historical. So essentially, it's not commonly known, but Celts and Slavs lived millennia on the same space.
Yeah.
So you usually uh, study a lot about Celts as American, and Slavs are the enemy in the East, which is trying to kill everybody. But in reality, like Celts and Slavs will live at the same space.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at just names, Morgana, Morgan, and we have Morana, right? It's literally
Mm-hmm.
one letter difference. We have R, you have G. And the spirit is described in a really similar manner.
Mm-hmm.
It comes to the hero Kukulan, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And Kukulan is like, you are hot as fuck, but you are a goddess of death, and I don't want to deal with you.
Yeah.
And she is like, fuck you, I'm going to kill you, and everything is you own. And
Yep.
then she destroys him. And that's the only myth the actual goddess is known for.
Right.
And look, in Slavic lore, there is this myth about Morana. So Morana comes with her sight and the best dress the deity can have, and she's like walking.
Mm-hmm.
And she is the most beautiful of all of the four goddesses of the seasons. But she comes from village to village, from kingdom to kingdom, and nobody wants to marry her.
Mm-hmm.
And then she destroys her dress, rises up, and starts slaughtering everyone. So
Mm-hmm.
that's pretty much a Ku Klux story,
Yeah.
literally the same story. And she is also connected with divination and violent death. And she's also connected with winter and end of the seasons.
Mm-hmm.
And people today interpret her as sexual deity,
Mm-hmm.
but she's actually not that. She is like the goddess of violent death, of winter, of
Mm-hmm.
prophecy, and of baneful works. So you come to her when you want to end things, right? And so I am convinced that it is the same, literally the same thing. Like
Yeah.
that with Tiamat and with Morgan, you can say, yes, it is the same goddess energy, but there are
But
some,
they are different. Yeah.
yes,
Yes.
but this is like the same. So
Yeah.
Morana, she has extreme form of dread around her and mystery, dread and mystery. You don't know what is in front of you. Run, but
Yeah.
there are moments when you call it, when you call her up, there is extreme amount of love involved.
Yes.
But it is like,
but it's not at the beginning.
but what I noticed is like in the beginning it is the love, but then it becomes a really powerful feeling of love, which is so powerful that it becomes damaging to the psyche.
Yeah, you can get almost like I can see why people worship entities based on the feeling. You know, like why you would want to give up placing yourself equivalent because of how overpowering that energy is. And so that can be extremely dangerous because it also places a lot of your power in someone else's hands if you let that happen. And then once again, if you fall to delusion and you start to make up what you want to have happen and ignore what's really going on, then you could trick yourself into all kinds of crazy beliefs that way.
Yeah, but like how you came first into contact with Morana, what your first ritual looked like?
So I was working with Tiamat. I've kind of stayed working with Tiamat for a long time. And Tiamat had Tiamat's weird compared to what most people who evoke are used to because I don't really evoke Tiamat. I mean, you can, but it's more like she gets you when she needs to. It's almost like she evokes you. So it isn't exactly the same. Like I can't just call her up and be like, "Hey, I need help." Like that doesn't work that way. So when I was trying to work through my own issues and whatnot, Tiamat had come to me and said, "Well, you need to evoke something else to help you do this." You know, and that's where the idea to call for another entity came from. And then I started getting ravens and crows just constantly flocking my backyard, and it made me think of the Morrigan, which is, you know, again, death and rebirth is part of her thing, which is part of shadow work, so it makes sense. But I still wasn't completely convinced, and so I walked out one day when the crows weren't there, and I said, if I'm actually supposed to work with the Morrigan, I want to sign. And two crows flew over the top of the head and crossed. And the symbol that I had recently been looking up for her was the cross spears. And I was like, okay, good enough. I'm gonna stop being an idiot.
So essentially, I just want to clarify something. So when you want to call Tiamat, you cannot choose when to do the ritual. What
Right.
happens is you feel a really strong magnetic pull,
Yes.
and you do the ritual just to give it a form, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
A
Correct.
form, magnetic pull. What
Yeah.
people
I
that-
can't just say, like, if someone says, "Hey, just call her up," I'm like, it doesn't work that way.
yeah. So essentially, you are not talking about you drinking coffee and then Tiamat comes and you are
No.
drinking coffee and then no, that's not
No,
what you
you
are.
still have to set down time and
Yeah,
space and everything
yeah.
to do it. But you
Yeah.
get you kind of get it's a magnetic pull is right, but you kind of get the longer you ignore it, the worse it gets. Like if you say like, "Oh, I don't have time for this right now," it's like, okay, well, you're going to start having extreme pressure and extreme, like basically panic attacks are going to start happening to you if you don't get a hold
I
on it at
what
some
you
point.
mean.
Yeah.
But I don't know that CMS does it, but I know that Morana does it. Like
Okay.
Morana, like fuck you, I gonna kill you. You have
Yeah.
to do certain thing.
It's
And
like
like
go
kind of
spend your
like
time. It's time. But it's a
yeah,
weird thing. Uh, so when I worked with the Morrigan, I just did kind of a casual evocation at first, but unlike again, different from others, with that it worked right away. It was much faster, and the impression I got was the equivalent of when someone says like the thing is already here with me. You know, like you just had to like open your mind to it. So it's like the Morrigan was like already ready to go, waiting for me to be ready, as opposed to having to be called up and conjured up or whatever in that first experience. But my first feeling of when I meet her, because we talk about feelings, was not the loving feeling. That happened later, again, as the relationship expanded. I was definitely more afraid at the beginning, but I think that was my own misunderstanding of what she stood for and what she's like.
Yeah, but like what you can use Morana for, because I can use the Slavic name. You agree that it's the
Yeah,
same?
yeah.
I mean,
For me, it was all shadow work stuff. So it was helping to find the problems within myself and these past traumas and think of her like a guide, sort of, where instead of going into this situation blind, I have someone who can yank me out if I get into trouble, sort of, or something like that, so that you don't get overwhelmed by reviewing the past trauma, so that you can take it one step at a time, things like that. But also, when I used to have a conversation with her about what she was, she didn't like to be called a god. She tried to describe herself more like what I would have called back in the day synchronicity, or like I think some people might call it the web or something like that. Like she tried to describe herself as if she was kind of part of that. And this may have been in and around me starting to understand that they're all connected. I'm not sure, but she was very heavy into this, like, I am, maybe a better way to put it is like fate, like the incarnation of fate. And so you could also, in some ways, interpret if danger's coming or things like that with her help as well, get
so
a sense for what's going to happen to people.
can I like translate you the
Yes.
Slavic word Morana? So Mora literally means misfortune.
Mm-hmm.
It means difficulty. It means violent death. It
Mm-hmm.
means tiredness, but it also means inevitability.
Yeah.
Translate of the word mora is also related to the English word must. So when you must to do something, it's not avoidable.
Right.
So
Yes.
it is about the fact that you must die.
Yes.
And she can also teach you how to prolong life in a natural manner.
Mm-hmm.
But it all comes one day at the end. You cannot be immortal.
Yeah, and I did have one time where I specifically asked about my own death because, how can you not ask that question? But the only answer I got, it just has made me more more curious than before, because the answer I got was a chuckling kind of laughter feeling, and that it will be extremely ironic. And that was all that was given to me, and I was like, okay, like, oh, great. So, and I don't even know in what form of irony we're talking here. Like, do we mean where it's foreseen by others while I can't see it coming myself, which is like literary irony, or is it in the way that people use irony today, where they mean like, it's kind of funny how that, like, you lived this way and then you died that way, type of thing. But I don't know exactly what the reference was, but it was kind of like the emotion that came across was in like a chuckling, this is hilarious way, and I was like, I don't know that I appreciate that feeling. But I guess that's what you get when you ask, a being of death how you're gonna die. So
Yeah, so essentially, like, did you use Morana for any practical things outside of shadow work?
not really. Shadow work was kind of the big thing. I was at the point in my practices where I had stopped casting spells to try to bring things into my life and had started focusing on myself and self-improvement. So most of my time where I was, casting for things would have been back when I was working with Ishtar and that sort of thing.
Yeah, but like regarding Ishtar, what are some advices you have regarding Ishtar, Astarte, Astral?
So it's hard for me to say if I was actually working with Ishtar at that time or if it was some version of myself because of how much delusion I was going through back then. I'm more solid on the work with the Morrigan and Tiamat and all of that stuff because it was so radically different than the work with all the other entities before that, and that the type of energy you feel working with them is the same type of energy I still get working with Tiamat now. Even though I don't see her as a spirit so much as like interface with the all through a certain lens.
Yeah. But
So I'm always hesitant to give advice on my time before that because I don't know how much of it is right. I know that some of it is because I got results, but I feel like I was maybe 50% getting real messages and 50% not back in the early days, if you can relate to that.
I can. To me, it's more like 70-30, 70%.
That may be more honest.
Actual thing, but that actual thing is that many instances we mixed with lunacy. So
Yeah.
I can like guarantee only for the last 10% of my published material to be something sensible. Everything before that is like,
Yeah, what you're describing is exactly how I feel about it. And that's part of why I had gotten rid of my channel before too, is I didn't want to mislead people with some of the things that I knew were not true and some of the things that I didn't know if they were true and all of that sort of thing. But I was kind of still stuck on myself when I deleted it because I was thinking as if everyone is following me like some cult leader or something, like they're all going to do these practices and screw themselves up. When most of my audience is practitioners who are just interested in hearing how our experiences are the same. So I've learned that since then, and that's why although those videos are still there, they're just on my new channel, but they're unlisted because I don't want random people on YouTube to bump into them. But they're in the playlist, so people who are old fans can go and rewatch any of that material they want in my playlist. But they're not like suggested by YouTube because I don't want random people. What I was getting toward the end was random people would find a video they liked, like say my video on servitors, and it would get around because it got popular, and people would just try that with no other practices, and that the act of working with servitors is definitely an easy gateway into self-delusion. So I felt like
yeah.
this is not the best video to be the most popular video. Things like that.
Yeah. But what's the most crazy like physical experience you had? Because you told to audience that you had like some experience where you did some experiments, is this psychological or not? And you got angry into the ritual, and then everything started to break.
Yeah, I've had one of those where things started. Well, they were falling off of the shelves, sort of. But I still don't know. For all I know, I always take both sides of this because, like, who knows? Maybe a big truck was going by or an earthquake. But that's just me trying to like explain it away as well. That's for my own comfort as well. But yeah, definitely I had that. But I would say the one that was more impressive to me was the fire one. I think I started to mention that here. I was doing a ritual once with a burner, an incense burner, and the charcoal things in there don't usually light on fire, so I don't know why a flame started in it. But it came up from the center of the burner like a column, and it was about this high out of the out of the burner. And I have a fire extinguisher, which I should have used because that's what a rational, sane person would do. But I was in trance state and I was just like, oh man, it's working. And I just kept going. And then when the ritual ended, the fire just went down. And that's one of those situations where I'm like, when I tried to go full psychological model, I'm like, well, I can't explain this one, but moving on. Because some of these experiences are like that, where it's just like, well, I could come up with reasons why it could be a once in a million chance thing, but also it is very interesting, especially timing wise.
So yeah. So I have like, I don't know, last few questions because it's getting pretty long.
Mm-hmm.
And but you are kind of just working with Tiamat on a weekly or monthly basis, and you are meditating on a daily basis.
Yeah.
So
So I work now with, like, I guess you could call it two entities. but one of them is myself in a sense. So you had mentioned in your shadow work video, the Atma is probably the best thing to work with. And I refer to it as the teacher because, but I recognized in your video that we're talking about the same thing, just like how we keep doing here. And that's that, like, I can kind of externalize it to speak to it, but I recognize it as a representation of my own inner self, like my subconscious and things like that, but more along the lines of it's a inner wrapping and combination of the shadow self, the higher self, the self you want to be, this everything, all of the aspects of you that aren't the conscious you are kind of pulled into this being. And so by talking to it, you can learn about yourself, but it isn't external. It's me learning more about me whenever that conversation is happening. But also I find that that's the thing that channels, like if I can pull energy, it comes through that. So sometimes I can even get very interesting answers through there. So I would say that's the type of thing where, just like you were saying before, you can almost talk to it at any point. But I'm aware that when I talk to that, I'm talking to myself, and that I'm just kind of asking the quiet part of myself if I'm doing things right in the conscious part of myself, you know. But then the other thing I work with is Tiamat, and Tiamat, like I said, happens when it happens. So I don't really, it's not necessarily weekly, but it's definitely more than monthly. And it's not on a schedule. So it's just whenever it happens, it's time to happen. And then I get a lesson, and that lesson is for me to work on, is usually what it feels like. Like I get shown something, and then I need to decipher it like a puzzle. And eventually it will change my personality as a result.
So, personally, so this is also like how you connect to your Atman or to your teacher. Because there is definitely some technique involved. Because if you just ask questions into thin air, you will get the loop.
Yeah, that's true. It's not the same. Yeah. So I wasn't able to do it before, and then Tiamat had asked me, and it's gonna sound crazy, but like Tiamat had asked me to merge myself with her. And so I agreed to do that. But then ever since then, I can talk to this other part of myself. And so it has a very similar energy to Tiamat as well, but it's not Tiamat exactly. So maybe that better explains what it is.
Dude. So essentially, do you know what we do in Hindu, like Kaianism? Like
No.
we call them through the yantras, and then there is one thing you have to do in their school, which is to ask them to merge with you. So that's the only thing we do, right? Everything else is like optional. But if you want to work with those Hindu spirits, you have to merge with them. Like they will not accept.
Yeah.
So what happens then is they will kind of give you imprint of into your, you call it subconscious, I call it energy field. It doesn't matter. You will imprint it. And then you will have it like a protective shield. And they will teach you how to like focus on your own soul. So behind the heart there is like a center, and behind that center there is like a core of your consciousness. The point is to like focus on that.
And
then you feel a short feeling of bliss. Feeling of bliss. And then you ask that bliss, what should you do? And that's how I do it.
I almost said I focus on my heart, but I didn't, because I wanted to talk about the merge thing first. But yeah, that's absolutely true. If I want to talk to that what I would say is the teacher, what you're saying is the Atma, that's how I do it. I interact with, I do a quick meditation and focus on that center.
Yeah.
And then it all just kind of happens on its own after that. But like I said, it's not something I could do starting out or anything. I didn't know how to do this before. And now it's almost like turning on a light switch when you do that, because I know the feeling, I know the way to do it. But I don't know a way to teach that to someone who hasn't done it. And the best explanation I can have is that Tiamat said that I needed to merge with her energy, and then I was able to do it after that. So
yeah. But the thing is, like, merging with entities, that's like, maybe you knew this, maybe you didn't, but once energy of the certain entity merges with you, you kind of need to go through with that specific entity or with that specific
Yes.
area until the
Yeah.
cosmic close.
Yeah.
So that's why I don't like teach it, because
Yeah.
people start merging and then they stop.
Well, that's why, unlike before, where I used to just try to evoke everything under the sun, I literally only work with Tiamat and then what I call the teacher, and that's it, because that is what I'm supposed to do according to Tiamat. So, and Tiamat is not necessarily like a matron or patron in the way that people think of gods, or Tiamat. I got into trouble back when I first was working with Tiamat because I started like wearing symbols and like trying to do the whole thing. And Tiamat was like, that's not what we do. And she basically made my life shit for a little while until I stopped trying to like look at her as just like the boss and instead took control of my own life again and was like, well, I'm going to make decisions and this and that. And there was a test, and I thought of this because I was watching. There was a video about a lady that was dealing with Belial that you had on your channel recently, and she had something that sounded kind of similar to something that happened to me, but a different way. Tiamat tried to test me to ask me to do things that were immoral and that were would have been very bad if I had gone through with it. And I thought about it and went and returned to her with the refusal to do that. And then her response to that was that I had passed. So the point of the test was to not listen, but not to just be opposed to her on all things, but rather to recognize where my limitations were, what I cared about, who I was, what my agenda was, that sort of thing.
Oh.
And then I was able to work with her more as, I don't necessarily want to say an equal because that doesn't sound quite right, but on equal footing, where it's like, oh, we're speaking to each other about concepts, but we're not necessarily serving one another. And she will do the same thing if you try to call her into a circle or anything like that, or command her. Like that does not work with Tiamat. She'll get you for that too. So basically, you can't be in charge or below, which is interesting.
But like, my concept of servitude is not like what people consider it to be. You probably watched some of that. So my concept of servitude is to like let the deity flow through you. But
That's fine. Yeah, she likes that. Like her. So part of the thing whenever we have communication is that merger is kind of happening again. Like it feels like you're filled up with something that I can't really explain. And it's almost like you're recharging in a sense. So I'm constantly kind of re-engaging with that energy that is Tiamat. And so the goal, it almost feels more like Tiamat has a vested interest in me continuing down my work, like a mentor would have. So it's not like a master-slave relationship, but it's more like a teacher-student relationship. So that's why I say, like, I don't feel like I'm not equal to them, like, exactly, but I'm also not a servant, so to speak.
so you and I are kind of on the same page mostly, but from
Mhm.
like a completely different perspective. So
Yeah. That's
and
why it's so interesting.
a completely different pathway to come to the same conclusions.
Hmm.
By the way, and I am like pretty, how can I say, shocked, because two things happened at once
Hmm.
in 2 days. So I interviewed two people, and both of those people had the same experiences as me, without knowing about shit, because
Yeah.
you never like told anybody, and not especially me, how those spirals look.
No.
But I described to you how they look because I saw
Yeah.
the same.
Yeah, and I can tell by the way you described it that you're attempting to describe it the same way that I'm attempting to describe it, but you saw what really is there, which is hard to, it's like impossible to describe.
Yeah.
But
The thing, like the biggest, how can I express this? So the biggest channel for the magician is to realize that him being able to call some energy up is nothing special.
yeah.
Point is understanding it, the attracting the, and here is the thing. So yesterday I was like discussing with some of my friend who is a Christian priest the Watchers and the Book of Enoch, right? Because there is actually a bunch of people who understand that there is something wrong with that part of the Old Testament, and that there is somebody clearly in there mentioned which is not discussed later. So I can give an exposition because it's an energy and it comes to Earth and create a different form of human being, and then it created fuckery. I can explain it in a sense, which is so there is no point for me to call the Watchers, right?
Right.
Because I can call their energy, but there is no way I can understand what they are saying. Actually, that's the main thing between me and the Watchers, is that I always manage to call the Watchers and to manifest it with the Watchers, but I never managed to understand them. Like and the thing is, so you probably had some experiments with them, really short ones, because everybody was in a phase of tripping to be the Nephilim. So
Yeah,
I'm gonna
right. Oh yeah.
once. And here is the thing. So I understood Azazel a little bit. I understood Azael a little bit. But Shemyaza was like, I call the energy, the guy talks, and I get what I want physically, but I don't understand a single sentence there.
Yeah.
So when he was like explaining, dude, we are like descending from the sea of light. And then from that sea of light, you have snakes. And those snakes are like dropping down. And they are like giving their essence to the future of reality. And I was like, dude, eh? But now I get maybe 10%.
Yeah.
Right? But I don't understand the part where he says, we come from the sea of light. Okay, I get it.
Right.
The sea of light drops the serpents of light to the world. I get it. The divine light descends from itself down to our plane. I get that. But I don't get the part of feeding the future of reality, because isn't the reality we ingest an illusion? How can you feed the future of something which doesn't exist? But then again, if this is an illusion, how you can feed the future of it? But if it's not the illusion, why do we don't see the things which are actually there? But we usually don't see them. So it's a complete clusterfuck. You cannot solve it, right?
Yeah.
And you cannot find the theory in the middle. But obviously, Shemyaza isn't wrong. I am wrong, because he is a little bit older than my. So obviously, he cannot be wrong. And like, what's the point of me conjuring him if you cannot get anything? So, like, the main challenge is, you smartly chose to work only with Yamat. I need to reduce the amount of spirits. So, the bigger challenge is to not blow up in your ego. Because that's actually a constant challenge. Because, like, when you are a magician, you have ecstatic experiences. And shit, which majority of people doesn't. And you are like able to remove certain emotions at will and to trigger certain emotions at will. Like, people deal with depression for years. You and I are able to like remove it with few incantations without any problems. And it really gives a feeling of like a speciality. But the point is to realize that we are not special, and the energies we call upon can destroy us at any second.
Oh yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
And that's the feeling that always comes with working with TMI. It's like, on the one hand, it's kind of like working with infinite love, but on the other hand, it's infinite destruction also. So
So,
you could be obliterated in a moment if desired. That's what it feels like.
so in this interview, like you and I explained 5 or 6 different practical techniques. I even stopped counting. So there is definitely a lot of information for somebody who is seeking.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I have the last question for this video. How, so out of all of the entities, I was humbled most by 3. Hecate, Varana, and Kali. So
Mm-hmm.
3 different energies coming from the same source of divine feminine,
Mm-hmm.
partially separate, in reality almost the same thing. But how Tiamat humbled you in your life? What?
I mean, so one thing to specify, and this is more generic answer. We can get into specifics after, but one thing to specify is that even to this day, you're just as likely to learn a lesson by having bad stuff happen as you are as having good stuff happen. So unlike where people have this kind of imagined idea of what it's like, where it's like, oh, now I have like a protector or a friend or a whatever, it is not at all like that. You're constantly being humbled if you step out of line in that way.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's up to you. Like, it doesn't happen at random necessarily. It's more like if you get too big for your britches, then it will happen to you, if that kind of makes sense. It's
Yeah,
like, oh,
yeah.
you need tough love right now, so that's how you get it. And so it's not like, a lot of like love and light folks will say like, oh, I just think positively and only positive things happen to me. And it's like, this is not at all how it works. This is like lunacy. Like, no, you will face trials, and then sometimes you'll be angry about it, and you'll just get back like this is what you need, sort of thing, in order to grow. But I would say like maybe one of the craziest things would be back when I first again was trying to wear all the paraphernalia and take that kind of back seat like she was in charge, and that didn't work out well for me. It resulted in a lot of psychological issues. It had a lot of uh, I started to question like things in my real life, like who were my friends or this or that and all that other kind of stuff. So it was a lot of psychological stuff that happened, and I started to believe, much like what you were saying, that I was being attacked by something else, and wrongfully, because I wasn't. But I was like desperate to get rid of it or to banish or whatever, and I was doing constant smudging and things like that at the time, and all because I was trying to let Tiamat be the thing in charge. Like, oh, I'll just leave everything to that. But by trying to let her be in charge, I was almost like becoming like a kid, where I'm like, I'll let my parents handle everything and the decisions. And she's like, no, you won't. But she didn't say no, you won't. She just messed everything up until I had to take control, until I had to like grow up on my own and take the seat of responsibility. And then she's like, there you go. And it only stopped once I took that responsibility on. It wasn't even, there was no like individual ritual to do or whatever, but once you fully embrace that responsibility, then the rest just cleared.
Yeah. But you told me this it was actual poltergeist and it kind of influenced your son. Really,
That was
really.
that was at a different time, but yeah. Yeah, that happened too. He was having night terrors right around the same time there was some weird poltergeist stuff happening. And that's when I stopped doing so many evocations and things. That's when I first cut back on that, because I didn't know if that could be related.
So can you explain, because I have many people mixing things up, what's the difference between poltergeist activity and you hearing voice in your head and your psyche fracturing?
So when I say that, I mean where there's something has moved, like if you go out of a room and you come back and then things are in a different order or something like that. like poltergeist activity is something that happens physically as opposed to something that you hear or experience.
Yeah, because like a lot of people report to me, I feel poltergeist activity because I heard a small knock
Yeah,
and
no, that's not
a
the same.
small. But here is the thing: when your mind is out of the blue, right? A small knock can be a bell ringing, right?
Hmm.
So, when people come to me, something is knocking. No, dude, your mind is simply stressed and you are making a bell ring out of a knock, right? When you have an actual poltergeist, right? It's either somebody sees some shit,
Hmm.
somebody in 3D sees some shit, or something is goddamn moving, right?
Yeah.
Like some shit moves, some
Things
shit
falling off shelves, things being in a
things,
different place when you walk into a room, but
but like
nobody's there to move them, stuff like that.
something occasionally falls, and I hear small knocks. No, that's not it. Poltergeist is like poltergeist. You cannot. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, like, can you like tell us for the end, like, do you have a different perspective on that poltergeist now?
I don't know. It's, so one other thing to just kind of round it out, there's one other thing I've told about that too, is that my dog was barking at the corner a lot at this time as well,
What
which
the
I find interesting. So
So he was barking at the empty corner.
yeah,
So it was not the case of like him being outside and barking on
no,
invisible thing, and then you realize he's barking on other dogs.
no,
He was actually in your house as a pet, barking at the corner of your house.
yep.
It doesn't make any sense unless something was there.
Right. And the corner that he was barking or that she was barking toward is the corner, like if you go through the doors there, that's my office, which is where I do ritual and all that other stuff. So that was interesting to me.
So, dude, like you cannot rationalize it.
No, that's what I'm
Much,
saying. Like if I try to go give you a rational answer now, I'm like, I just don't know because there isn't one.
yeah. Because why would dog bark at empty space? Because when the dog is inside, he doesn't hear other dogs.
Mm-hmm.
So he cannot bark at other dogs while you think he is barking at empty space. What happened to me a lot of the time when I was delusional is I would think dogs are barking on spirits, while in reality they are barking at other dogs.
Yeah.
Other
Yeah.
dogs are yelling, and then they are replying them. How what dogs do.
Yeah.
Uh, so yeah, we covered like 50 different topics in this podcast. Shared 10 techniques, and we can talk more, but you have responsibilities and I do too, so it's not
Yep.
possible. I need to update you that my exorcism cases are getting better.
Good.
Since it's like psychotic breakdown, voice in a head kind of a thing, the main difficulty is explaining to them that something motherfucker is attached, but it's not the cause, it's the
Yeah.
effect. And like it's really difficult to explain it to people. So I am getting things better, but in reality it's still a long way to being solved
Yeah.
because you need to
A lot
figure
of
out.
a lot of people don't want to hear that answer. So that's part of it too.
Yeah, but like I think that those cases cannot be solved effectively or
Hmm.
cannot be solved as easily as if when you are using an exorcism,
Yeah.
because you use an exorcism, you relieve them so you can talk sense into them. Like
Yes.
you cannot talk sense into them if they have attachments too. Then it's like something actually external exacerbating the effects of their own thing, and then
Hmm.
it's impossible to talk sense into them. Actually, the woman with Belial video, so nobody will watch the 2 hour 10 minute of this because you look, you watched that entire video and you were
I
like
did.
shocked as I was, right?
Yeah.
But she has a problem, but that problem is not named she thinks it's named. Like she is
Oh.
touched by something, but it's not him.
Yeah, that's what I think too.
Yeah. So we agree there. I
Mhm.
did some exorcism and shit, and she got relieved, but I kind of need to do it a lot for her to actually realize. I need to be her to be relieved for a month every day in order for me to like talk sense into her
Yeah.
in this manner, because like uh, when I had like the same problem and when you had the same problem, so
Mhm.
what you and I did is we probably tried a bunch of banishings and
Yes.
bunch of exorcisms, and it relieves you every time,
But
and then
it
you
gets exhausting.
yeah, and then you fucking realize, man, I am like doing it all the time, and maybe this is not necessarily external thing. Let me
Yeah.
try and that's when thing resolve, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yep.
And what also people need to say is you and I, like you and I, we also have the same problem again sometimes. So
Yeah.
returns,
Yes.
it returns, quote unquote, but you know that you simply have a small attachment with a lot of stress. So you need to remove the attachment and to remove the stress,
Yep.
and
That's right.
everything will return to normal.
Mhm.
But man, when like what's more like why I called you on a show, because you can like you are like just like me a recovered case from this.
Yeah.
So we are like not talking about something like we are not playing smart ass here.
Yeah.
We
Right.
actually know how it is to have a voice in your head
Mhm.
ringing for multiple hours a day
Yeah.
on the same loop. So mine was like this. Mine was like this. I want to make it a little bit funny. I'm going to kill you. I
Mhm.
am an ancient being. I am going to butcher you, and you will
Mhm.
be destroyed. And it was going on a loop for a long time.
Mhm.
24. And what I was doing is I was like, when I was praying to Jesus Christ or something, it would get relieved. And then after 2 or 3 days of me not praying, it would return. Uh,
Yeah.
so I like didn't want it to be Christian, so I used other methodologies. I used Lucifer benching and all kinds
Mhm.
of stuff. And one day I was like taking a shower and I was like washing certain parts of myself, and it wasn't there. And I was like, wait a minute, I was washing certain parts of myself and I'm taking a shower. So if it was external thing, it got afraid by me washing certain parts of myself and taking a shower, and it doesn't make any goddamn sense. So
Right.
this has to be connected to something else, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
years down the line, when I started working with the Hindu guys, they were like, this is how this operates, and that's it. But
Yeah.
it's really difficult to explain this to people who are in it, because
Yes.
when you are in it, the voice is out and you cannot know that voice is inside.
Yeah.
So, but the most painful part of the entire thing is that you have to pretend you don't hear it,
Mhm.
because if you tell anyone,
You
it's
go into the
a
asylum.
much more bigger problem than the voice itself.
Exactly.
I was like hiding it. I was like pretending nothing is happening.
Yeah.
But the problem is like you pretend nothing is happening and you see that it's coming from the corner. And then
Yes.
you look into the corner like a terrified dog, you know? And,
Yeah. And start barking at
yeah.
it.
But you have to like pretend everything is normal. So what I did is when I started having those attacks, and not attacks, but those experiences, because it was just a small parasite and me tripping out.
Mhm.
Uh, I like relocated in another room because I was afraid that whatever is there will somehow attack my family. And
Mhm.
do you understand what kind of a stress it is? Is you are
Yes.
sleeping in a room with two little brothers,
Yes.
and then you have that episode. So I
Mm.
have to like change my room,
Mhm.
and then I was like trying to change the rooms again, and like it's becoming weird.
Yeah.
And what would happen is like when I go to other place, it would be absent for 2 days, usually because I will be doing some new stuff,
Yeah.
and then it would return again in the corner again with the same loop, right?
Yep.
So what I would do is I would like change the side of the bed to change the corner or something.
Oh yeah.
And I mean, it's an invisible fight.
Yeah.
Only people who went through it knew it,
Mhm.
right? And then my like goal is to like explain to those people that, you know, what they are experiencing is only to a really small percentage external,
Yeah.
and that I can do quadrillion banishings and it will relieve them. But they need to accept that there is a rift
Yeah, there's
within
an
their
issue
own
they need to
mind.
fix.
You also need to tell them that them having a rift within their own mind doesn't make them non-human,
Right.
because
Yeah.
that's also a battle here. You are not a worse human being if you have a rift and maybe you need some pills to calm you down,
Right.
or maybe you need some meditation, or maybe you need some benching. You are not less human.
Right.
And like the most tragic thing for me is to like them being afraid to go to the doctor because they know that they will maybe be institutionalized.
Right.
And so I need to tell them to go to the doctor because some things can help. But also
Mhm.
I know why they are afraid of. I never
Yes.
went
Right.
to the doctor. And I think
Yeah.
it's
Same here.
things, but I never went to the doctor for the same reason. They
Exactly.
are not going to the doctor. And it's like really painful, man.
Yeah.
But like, can you just tell us at the end how you realized definitely that it wasn't, you know, that specific thing which attacked you in the beginning? So first attacks, first fracturing, maybe before you even got into the occult, that's how first fracturing happens. How
Yeah.
you realized before you got into occultism, or when you just started, that that thing wasn't something which is necessarily outside.
Yeah.
What
I
was
think I got into the occult because I thought that I would have answers for me on the things that I was experiencing, and that's set so that and that all relates to that. It was all related to the trauma. So that's how I got interested in the first place. Um, but what was the question specifically?
So before you got into the occult and you had those fracturings, right? So
Mhm.
you had a voice from outside looping and you don't know what to do. It was before you got into the occult.
Yeah.
So when you realized during your occult that that looping voice wasn't anything external. And I know it
Yeah.
was before you created the channel, because when you created the channel, you were already relieved from that specific looping voice. You have other dramas to deal with, but the looping voice wasn't there. You
I
removed it.
think it was kind of like the first of the many shards that I had to deal with later. But so it was the start of having dealt with one of them, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But
But how you realized it wasn't external
I
when
think
you
I just got lucky. Like I don't remember a moment of like how I realized it so much as I just remember like kind of accepting the fact. It was more like an acceptance of a fact that I didn't want to accept for some reason. You know, I didn't want what it represented to be real in my physical past. So I had to come to accept what it was. And I just, you know, I just don't want to get into the personal stuff about it if that's all right.
okay, but I specifically like those last 17 minutes I made for the people who are actually having the problem.
Yeah.
So they can like go and watch this last 17 minutes because that's specifically about them, and
Hmm.
that you and I like talking just specifically on them, and this is to them because both you and I don't like talking about years of psychotic breakdown.
Yeah.
But we were forced to change the side of the bed every night, hoping that it will go away. And it's like, oh, so thank you for coming on a show. I really
Hmm.
appreciate it and talk to you soon because
Yeah.
it's
Thanks for
almost
having me.
2.5 hours. So this is Joseph Mark. This is Grand Infinity. This is Cycle Saucer. This is Motherfucker. Thank you for having me on a show and talk to you again,
Thanks.
brother. Bye.
Bye.